Hey beer babes, just letting you know that we went down to Railton to 7 Sheds to check out all the cool stuff that Willie's doing. This episode was shot outside, so there's a little bit of wind in the background, but that's the fun of shooting on location. Enjoy this episode. Hey beer babes, welcome back to Beer Babies, the podcast journey where we try to find the best beer money can buy. Today I've come all the way down to Railton, and I'm here with Willie from 7 Sheds. Thank you so much for having us down. I thought a good way to get started would be to sort of figure out a bit of the backstory. So what is the origin of 7 Sheds?
The origin? Well, I guess like everything, it starts with an idea. So the idea was to start a craft brewery in our backyard. I mean, we live here. Then you have to have money to make that happen. Yep. So we had a limited budget. We went to our local council, Kentish Council, and told them what we wanted to do, and they were happy for us to open, you know, a craft brewery in a residential area. Yeah. I mean, by the way, we've got 11, 12 neighbours here, so that's always been on our mind. Yeah. And then, of course, I think I really should say is that my partner, Catherine, was 100% behind it. So then we had this opportunity to start the brewery. So that was 13 years ago. Okay, yes. Our 13th birthday is next month, April. Wow, yes. So you can imagine when we started, there were only 2 or 3 craft breweries in Tasmania. Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear that because it's quite trendy now to have a craft brewery, but I suppose that you got, like you just said, you guys were one of the first. Yeah. And I guess I think there were about 80 Australia-wide at that stage. Why, I suppose, is the next question. And I think the first answer to that is because we could. Yep. Okay, we had the money. My partner was behind it. The council let us do it. And then we had to put it together. And the brewing equipment is mainly pre-loved dairy equipment. Okay. So we were able to buy that on a budget. And that means that our brewing process, we use open fermenters, and they're quite shallow open fermenters. Okay. And I think that's automatically quite different to every other, well, not every other, but the 95% other breweries that basically use cylindrical, conical tanks. Yeah. Okay. Often made in China or North America. This is all very recent technology. You know, stainless steel has actually only been around for about 120 years. Beer's been around for 5,000 years. Yeah, ages. And the way we make it is the way that beer was made 150 years ago. So it's it's open fermenting. It's time consuming in that we don't have an automatic bottling machine, so we can't bottle carbonated beer. So all our beer is conditioned or fermented, if you like, in the bottle or keg. Okay. So that's a minimum two week process, which we knew, you know, so that takes time. We don't filter the beers, we don't do anything, we don't remove anything from the actual beers. So I guess we always knew we were going to make full flavoured beers that we wanted to drink. Now, a couple of other things happened along the way. Was while I was trying to put this brewery together in the shed, and by the way, the shed was already here when we bought the property in 2003. We also applied for a federal government regional tourism grant to help us build the cellar door. Yep. And the idea was there was a minimum grant of 50,000, but you had to have 50,000 to match it. Yep. So we applied for that, and that was in the latter days of the John Howard government, 2007, and that allowed us, we were successful, so that allowed us to build a cellar door. So we had a shop front, you know, we had a direct sales there. So the pressure was on me to finish putting the brewery together. Yeah, I guess the only thing I think you haven't answered is like, why beer in particular? Are you passionate about beer? So that was a bit I didn't... Okay, so, well, yes, but I think you hear those words so often. I'm passionate about beer that they are meaningless. Yeah. I don't quite know what it means. So, you know, it's more than that. But for me, I mean, I'd worked as a freelance journalist. I had specialised in writing about beer for 25 years.
Okay, wow.
And many people would say I was way ahead of my time, because I was doing that from the late 80s till 2012.
Yeah, that's it. You beat the hipsters to it.
Indeed, indeed. And I guess one of the motivations for opening this brewery was, although, you know, I was being sent and sampling and critiquing all these so-called craft beers that were coming out of, let's be honest, most of them were people like James Squire or Matilda Bay, that were arms of the big brewery. And I guess I was just disappointed that the beers didn't quite live up to the difference.
Yeah.
And also you've got to appreciate that at this time, when we started doing this, I was at an age where I sort of thought, if I don't do this, I'm going to be a very grumpy old bugger. Yep. So, you know, it was almost like I had to get it out of my system,
well, that's it.
Or even fail. But I didn't want to be sitting here with someone like you in what are we in, 2021, saying I could have built a craft brewery.
Yeah,
okay?
And I suppose it's very much if you want something done right sort of situation. Like, you got to back yourself.
Look, yeah, sure, but that's easy to say in hindsight. At the time, it was a leap into the unknown. You know, I had been a home brewer. I had worked in the home brew industry in Sydney.
Okay.
But you know, we were also very realistic about whether this could work from a regional town. I mean, this is a regional town with a population of 1,500 people.
Yeah, this is a very
northwest Tasmania. But my partner Catherine, her background is in regional development and tourism. So she was able to tap into the statistics of how many people visit major tourism attractions near here, like Cradle Mountain, how many people go through the next town, which is Sheffield, how many tourists, I should say. So we had a fairly modest business plan that if after 2 or 3 years we could build up the traffic through the cellar door, then that would provide some sort of cash flow that would allow us to turn it into a full-time business. Yeah. Because we were still working day jobs for the first 2 or 3 years. Now I've gone off on a tangent. So what was your main thrust of that question?
Well, the main question was about the beer, and I think you have really answered it. It's like,
but don't get the idea that this was a carefully planned thing. I mean, once we got running, it was, you know, a seat of the pants. The money was running out. We didn't want to borrow money from a bank. We didn't want to get involved in investors. So our modest business plan, and by the way, for the first 3 or 4 months we were open, we only had one beer, and that was Kentish Ale. So I don't know anyone else who's ever opened a brewery that only has one beer.
With one beer.
But we were quite realistic that if there wasn't a market, if it was a bit too strong flavoured or too much for people, then, you know, we'd just drink it ourselves, which was part of the plan anyway. And we wouldn't have lost money. We still had day jobs. But very quickly it became apparent that people liked our beer. We were running out, so we had to keep brewing it, and then we introduced other beers into the range. I probably had a naive idea that we were going to have 3 or 4 regular beers and the odd seasonal. If you look at our list now, there's about 11 or 12 beers on it. So there's all different stories behind that. But yeah, like I said, don't get the idea that this was all carefully planned with 5, 10, 15-year business plans.
Well, it sounds like, particularly like hearing like how old you guys are as a craft brewery, it would have been a huge risk. Well,
it wasn't a risk because all we would have done, we still had the real estate. We didn't owe anyone to the bank. We didn't have investors. It was our decision.
Okay. I suppose, I guess maybe I didn't word it. I think more as like 13 years ago, people in Tassie would probably drink Bogues or Cascade, depending which side of the island you're on. So I guess coming at it, like you said, with more flavoursome beer would have been quite new, but it sounds like you found your market. Yeah,
look, we did. And I guess in that case, you know, we sold a lot, in the early stages, we sold a lot of keg beer in Hobart.
Okay.
And I guess that's become super competitive now. But, you know, before what I'd call the second wave of brewery openings, you know, and we knew that was happening. There were a handful of outlets in Hobart that would take our beer, and so there was an audience for it.
Yeah.
But you had to go to where the population base was.
Yep.
So, you know, eventually we started doing festivals, and we did large festivals like the Taste of Tasmania for 8 years. We did Festivale in Launceston for 10 or 11 years. We took a decision a couple of years ago to step back from those, and there were reasons there. But we were going to keep doing the, you know, smaller festivals, but COVID's come along and complicated that.
Changes everything.
But you know, we're lucky in a way that we're small. We can be quite nimble and pivot, the great buzzword.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just COVID, by the way, that's come along. In this 13 years here, we have had 2 major floods.
Oh, wow.
We've had bushfire seasons where all the tourists just packed up and went home. So COVID for us, I mean, if it had arrived in the 2nd or 3rd year of our business, would have been fairly confronting financially and emotionally. But I guess because we'd already been through these other things and the global financial crisis, by the way, you know, I guess we were more resilient to little disruptions that might arrive.
I guess you've learned to sort of roll with those punches, and like you said, because of sort of the size of your business, you are able to adapt and pivot and make it work, which is really good. So as we were saying, at the minute I'm trying your pale. And so can you tell us a little bit more about this, and maybe a bit more about a couple of your particular beers?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to the time when we opened this cellar door, and we only had one beer, and that was, you know, so the pressure was on, the cellar door had been built. What beer are you going to brew first? So Kentish Ale was always the one that I brewed as a home brewer, and I thought that would be our flagship. So we brewed this copper amber, fairly flavoursome ale, and that went quite well. But I realised, and the feedback we got from people was it was might have been a bit flavoursome for some folk. So I always knew there was, you know, you needed a paler beer that wasn't quite as robust or bitter. So the Paradise Pale really grew out of that idea that, and it's based on what used to be called summer ales in England. So, you know, a lot of the producers of real ales realised that those beers weren't perhaps what you should be drinking on hot summer's day. So they developed summer's ale, which, like Paradise Pale, is about 25% malted wheat. And the rest malted barley. We've changed the hop regime, but that is now 100% Galaxy. We liked the new varieties that were coming out of Tasmania that, by the way, weren't available when we started up. So, and once we started doing big festivals like the Taste of Tasmania, we realised you had to have a beer that looked, you know, wasn't going to confront people. It was a golden beer that tasted roughly like what they might be drinking. And certainly that was our hero beer at the Taste of Tasmania. Sometimes when we had, you know, 5 or 6 beers on tap, Paradise Pale would account for half the volume of all our sales. So that told us that, you know, in events like that, which were not necessarily craft beer events, that people were quite happy to drink a beer that was approachable and looked like what they might have drunk.
I'm finding this very nice. The whole reason we started this podcast was because me and my mates would basically only drink pure blondes, which really tasted like nothing. So we were looking to expand our palate a little bit. And I still do find sometimes a few of the stronger beers are a bit much for me, but I've really moved into, I like my IPAs and stuff like that, and I feel like this, it's a lot more similar in taste to that. Your Kentish Ale was your flagship. What is it? So, what is it that particularly makes a beer like a Kentish Ale?
Well, it's a bit of a play on words.
Okay.
Because this municipality is called Kentish.
Oh, okay.
And it's not, you know, a lot of people assume it's something to do with Kent and England.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But it was actually named after a ratbag surveyor called Nathaniel Kentish.
Oh, okay.
But our Kentish Ale is a play on that and Kent, because the bittering hop is East Kent Goldings.
Oh, okay, yep.
But we also use our own Cascade that we grow here, and Ella hops, which is grown down south.
Yeah.
So I call it a New World Pale Ale. But a lot of people probably assume that it's English.
Yeah.
And I have been accused of being an Anglophile brewer, that I don't mind. You know,
Yeah.
people. I mean, I'm certainly, you know, my inspirations for beers in the early days were from travelling around England and tasting real ales.
Yeah.
Not so much the American craft beer movement. So that's what a Kentish Ale is. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm really enjoying this pale. I would highly recommend any of the beer babes out there to, if they're heading down or up even Railton way, to stop in. It's been lovely to talk to you, Willie. Thanks for taking the time. We better say, what's the actual address here? So if anybody's looking for it, how do they get here?
Well, it's 22 Crocker Street, Railton. But if you Google Seven Sheds or even Craft Brewery Northwest Tasmania, it should come up.
Yep.
And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so make sure you look these guys up, come down, check it out, because I've really enjoyed this beer and it's been great having a chat to you.
Okay, thanks, Will.
See you next time, guys.
You've got a question.
Which one? Oh.
What's your favourite beer?
Okay.
You have to leave this in.
Yep,
Yeah.
all right. So I can't believe I forgot the most important question.
Okay.
So, Willie, we ask everybody this.
Yes.
Please answer honestly.
Yep.
What's your favourite beer? It doesn't have to be one that you make.
Okay. I do get asked this fairly often. In the context of which of my beers is favourite, but I'm going to throw it back to you because I think it is a fairly facile question. Define favourite.
Oh, well, God, now we're talking. Well, I suppose, and that's a really hard thing too,
Yeah.
because we have a rating system on our regular episodes of Beer Babies, which is the 6-pack test, which is basically if you had 6 of these, how many could you drink? And so that question, how much you want to drink and how much you can drink are two very different things.
Yeah.
So the way that I would think of my favourite beer is, what's the beer that you want to drink the most of? Which do you enjoy drinking the most? What beer brings you pleasure?
Look, it's all of Seven Sheds beers, and the other thing is, you know, if you open a craft brewery in a regional town, funnily enough, 95% of what I drink is my own beer.
Yep.
Right. I mean, if we go to festivals and things, I might try other people's beers, but you know, one of the reasons of starting your own brewery surely is that you're going to consume beer. What I drink most of, I don't know whether I could actually quantify that. It changes. I mean, if you're talking about favoured children, I mean, Kentish Ale is the favourite child because it launched this business. If you're talking about my current favourite, it's probably the Smoke and Joseph.
Okay.
And that's because it was a beer that's our newest beer that we released in early December. And it was a result of the last overseas trip that Catherine and I had 18 months ago. We went to Poland. We did a collaboration brew with a bunch of Polish craft brewers who had visited us here.
Okay.
If you can believe this, to look at our hop growing. But they'd also been down south to Bushy Park.
Yeah.
And we tasted one of their beers called Grodziski, and it is an oak smoked wheat beer of only roughly 3% alcohol. And look, I've tasted a few different beers, as you can imagine, in my career, both as a journalist and a brewer and a traveller. And I had never tasted that flavour combination in a beer. Oak smoked wheat. And the other thing is we already have a peat smoked beer in our portfolio. Okay. And to make that beer, I peat smoke the grain. So I knew I could potentially smoke the wheat over oak shavings. Which I did, and then because everyone's been telling us we should put our beer in a can, and because Morrison's Brewery now offer contract brewing and canning facilities, we brewed it. I did several pilot brews here, but then we went and brewed it at Morrison's in late November, put it in cans early December. So now, pretty much at 5 o'clock when I knock off, it's a pint of Smoke and Joseph, and then I think about what else I might be in the mood for.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. We'll wrap up again.